Welcome to another Canny Conversations podcast. Today we're meeting somebody who we regard as a mentor, somebody who is an influential person in our life, an individual that plays a pivotal role in advancing skills development and vocational education within the UK and even globally. It's a pleasure and an honour to welcome you to the podcast. Paddy, thank you so much for coming today. Paddy Craven from City and Guilds, welcome.
Thank you very much, Saf.
Thank you. So talk to us a little bit about City and Guilds first, as an organisation and institute. Slightly misunderstood, I would suggest, to some people. They don't understand the depth and the breadth of the organisation. It is more than just an awarding organisation. It's more than just a charity as such. It's much more complex as a group. So talk to us a little bit about, City and Guilds, the organisation, the history, the rich history, the work that you do, the impact that you make, please.
No, certainly, and I think it's and it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss the breadth of City and Guilds. I think in some ways we've got the strength of our heritage, and our heritage goes back over 140 years, and in many ways plays out into the original Lively Guilds companies of London, who were the sort of the bastions of the various skills disciplines that they supported and essentially invented the concept of apprenticeship even back then. This idea that a novice was put under the wing of a mentor and developed into the profession, and at a certain point would produce their masterpiece, and that would be judged, and they were then inducted into the professional occupation. So we've got that long history, and although that gives us a very rich foundation on which to build in terms of our vocational technical skills education credentials, it also, I think, only tells a bit of the story, because City and Guilds has always been far more than an awarding body, and increasingly is far more than an awarding body, as we have to be. Oftentimes when I get into a cab in central London and I get chatting to the driver, I don't think I've ever had a conversation where they or a member of their family hasn't got their guilds in something, and whether that's where they began, whether that's where their parents or grandparents or uncles and aunts, etc., began their careers. That's something which really does resonate with me in terms of the amount of people that we touch. But that's the accreditation part of what we do. A lot of people don't realise that we also have, in recent years, a much more expanded view of education and assessment and learning. We have a footprint in online learning, which we've had for a while through Kineo, which allows us to think very differently about the way in which learners engage with education and development. And we also have quite a strong link into leadership and management skills and executive coaching through the Institute for Leadership and Management and the Oxford Group, and that's an area which really has been actually on the increase more recently, as we've had a lot of focus on the need to have productivity gains in the UK. One of the core components of achieving productivity gains has been cited as better developed leadership and management skills in organisations as a way of unlocking the potential of organisations. So we've got that facet to us as well. And then very recently we've had more of a direct move back into training, which in some ways it feels like a little bit back to the future. I want to say back to the future, well before my time. I mean, I've been at City and Guilds about 12 years now, but it's before my time. We actually used to have direct engagement with training as well as accreditation, and then moved away into more accreditation and awarding and away from training. But recently we've moved back into that space, and we've now got 3 organisations that do direct training. Gen 2, who are based up in Cumbria, do a lot of work with Sellafield and nuclear engineering and various disciplines in that sort of locality. We've got Intertrain, who specialise in railway and infrastructure maintenance and support based around the country. And then very recently we've got Trade Skills for You, who largely specialise in electrical technician work. And when we look at initiatives like net zero and clean energy, the interesting aspect of those is that all roads kind of lead to electricity. So regardless of the means by which you generate the energy, electricity is going to become a high dependency for not only our country but countries around the world.
Okay, so there's a fair amount of diversification there. You've got your online learning platform, Kineo. You've got your ILM, which is again a very specialist within the leadership and development aspect of it. You've got your training provider arm as well, and then you've got the foundation that's linked, that's connected as well. So talk to us a little bit about that, the foundation.
Yeah,
as well.
no, thank you. And again, I guess that's kind of, in some ways, it's kind of it's one of the jewels of City and Guilds, which we probably don't always talk about and promote as much as we should. The foundation, the City and Guilds Foundation, was born out of the fact that we are a Royal Charter status charity organisation, and therefore we have a kind of a we have more than a responsibility to ensure that we dispatch on those duties. We ensure that a percentage of our surplus every year gets repurposed back into foundation activities. And I guess if I was to summarise that, then the type of things the foundation focuses on, we give out bursaries each year for learners who are disadvantaged and might need some financial support to engage in education and learning. We also have a series of programs and projects. The common denominator typically with foundation projects is the learner. So those learners that are furthest from the labour market, maybe have faced some disadvantage, and are sort of minority groups. We will tend to focus on them, and that will go hand in hand with locality. And we provide project funding to explore new ways of allowing them to engage with education and training. And then finally, I guess another facet of the foundation is that we are champions for excellence, and we have a program called the Princess Royal Training Awards, where every year we award the PRTA to a variety of organisations, big and small, who have demonstrated excellence in terms of workforce development, retention, and allowing their workforce to progress in their careers. And we have an award each year, we have a celebration each year, and then we use those to cascade as case studies for other organisations.
Okay. Paddy, you touched on the fact that you've been at City and Guilds for nearly 12 years, and within the 12 years, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've had sort of two big roles now. The first role being sort of Director of Assessment, Policy, Research and Compliance, and now moving over to Policy, Strategic Partnerships and Stakeholder Engagement. Big titles, big roles, big responsibility. So talk to us a little bit about the current role and really that journey that you've had with City and Guilds.
No, it's been and it surprised me actually when I look back, and it was 12 years. It's 12 years that have passed very quickly, and whether that's my age, I don't know. Whether the years just seem to pass more quickly as you get older, I don't know. But it seems to have flashed by. And when I first came into City and Guilds, it was very much within their product development directorate, and I guess I brought to them a kind of a blend of a broad experience of awarding bodies, and I've worked for various awarding bodies in the past as well, Cambridge Assessment, OCR, RSA exams, and that kind of development of awareness of development of curriculum, assessment, measurements, very much in the vocational space, although it varied a bit with OCR and Cambridge Assessment. And then also a kind of a healthy interest I've always maintained around innovation. So I was involved in a lot of pioneering schemes in those awarding bodies where we started to really just test out the potential for technology, predominantly technology, as a catalyst for innovation and for change. And so those things I brought to City and Guilds in terms of where they were at. They've always been viewed as a pioneer of innovation themselves and very much supported that journey. And then started to move away from a direct involvement in product and regulated product into a much broader role where my role these days is monitoring policy coming out of Westminster and out of the UK nations as well, particularly education and business policy, which then for me is kind of the fusion of where skills sits, and also developing important stakeholder and strategic partnerships. One of the things that I think we have learnt over the years is that it's very rare that one organisation can affect change on its own, and therefore we're always seeking to establish strong partnerships and relationships with adjacent organisations. Our adjacent relationship with Pathway Group and Multicultural Apprenticeships is an example of that for us, where we work hand in hand with organisations that we think excel in a particular field, and therefore we can bring something to it and they can bring something to solutions as well.
Okay, so in terms of the sort of current responsibility that you have, it's fairly wide and ranging. So, there's been partnerships with other awarding organisations. There's been sort of thought leadership in terms of research and so forth. I mean, you touched on productivity, but you've created an impact report as well in this particular year. You've had a lot of lining up with other awarding organisations, potentially maybe seen as competitors in a way.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about your partnership ethos and some of the sort of thought leading work that you've done.
No, and I think it's very important to think when you're an organisation of our size and an organisation that carries kind of the credibility and trust that our brand carries, and it absolutely does. The one thing that comes across to me time and time again when I speak to people is that people respect City and Guilds, and when we talk about something, they recognise it as being from a fairly neutral place. In terms of the contributions that we make. So just to pick out a couple of examples that you touched on there, the impact report was quite a seminal piece of work for us off the back of several years of things like the foundation and the support that it had been giving to various projects and initiatives. But what it chose to do was to talk, I think far too seldom, the educational sector and the vocational educational sector talks about itself in monetary terms. And the reality is that if you want to get the Treasury to sit up and take notice, then you have to start to express things in monetary terms and that kind of value. So we started to produce an impact report which not only expressed the reach that we were having into social impact and social mobility impact, but also started to express that in the sense of, this is what it means in monetary terms to the country and to the organisation. And that's, I guess, where you get some of the references that the input report made to 15.3 billion to society, etc. And that can be either directly through the benefit to the individual in terms of what they go on to do in terms of employment and then income tax returns, etc. Or it could also be in the adjacent areas of health benefits, perhaps other benefits that they would draw down if they weren't in employment, and also starting to move into maybe some work that we do around ex-offenders, which then has a monetary value as well. So that was very much what was at the heart of the impact report, and we produce that every year, and every year I think it starts to demonstrate more and more the essence of what we're about as an organisation. The collaboration with, I guess, organisations that people might view as competitors was very intentional. And we produced a variety of reports over the years. We produced one with NOCN, one of our main competitors in the construction sector, around the concept of closing the gap. And that came out of a conversation that I was having with Graham, the CEO, after a conference, where one of the things that we were saying was that actually, although we might have differences and we might be in competition, we also have a lot of common areas that are of concern to us. And one of the areas that was concerned to us at the time, which actually played out through policy, was a fixation on level 3 and above, for some commendable reasons, but I think there was an essence of unintended consequences as well, which then kind of devalued anything at level 2 and below.
Yeah.
And yet, if you wanted to have a rich educational system equipped with providing the ladder of success that Rob Halfon so often spoke about, then you need to have a system that allows people various stepping in and stepping off points. You need to have a choice in the system. The thing that we tried to home in on that particular report was how you might construct a qualification and accreditation system that allowed for a truly mix and match approach. And that predated by some years the work that was done through the Sainsbury review and reform, but was touching on very similar concepts. And off the back of that, we then had the emergence of the Future Skills Coalition, which has been in place 2 years now. And I remember at the time when Kirsty RMD was having a chat with David Hughes from AOC and the CEO of ALP at the time as well. And they were talking about how at times the further education sector didn't do itself any favours by having a very disjointed voice in front of policymakers, and therefore it became very diluted and fragmented, whereas typically schools were far more aligned, universities were far more aligned in terms of their narrative. and therefore there was a need to have a much closer cohesion, collaboration, and the general agreement was there's probably a good 80% of agreement across various bodies in the sector. So why don't we bring them together as a coalition? We'll have a presence at the party conferences, and we've done that for 2 years now, and it's been highly successful. We've got something called the Skills Hub that we run at the party conferences, where there's a collection of about 10 or so programme partners and other third sector partners as well, all of whom come together under a unified voice and programme.
So, Paddy, just to summarise in terms of actually the role and the work that you're doing. So, Director of Policy, Strategy, Partnership and Stakeholder Engagement. How would you sort of briefly surmise what that is? What does that entail?
How does that look like in a week?
Yeah.
So what does that work out as? So policy. Policy is very much, and at the moment we are still in the kind of the white heat of post-election. Labour have hit the ground running. They're very keen to move forward at a pace with a variety of initiatives, which means that there's consultations coming out every week on different matters. And I guess a consultation is a very obvious example of an engagement with a policy matter. Behind the scenes, we also do our own work in terms of engaging with the right departments, ministers, civil servants, so that we maintain an open dialogue regardless of whether there's a consultation in place or not. Yeah. But at the moment, that's taken up a lot of time. We've had the very recent announcement on the pause to defunding and reform of level 3 qualifications. We've still got the curriculum and assessment review in play. We've only just landed the devolution consultation, which lands, a week before Christmas.
Yeah,
and then we've got to engage with that in some way before we come back round again. So policy's quite clear. I think the trickier part for us with policy is, although I think all of us would recognise why you might have devolution of mainstream schools education across the United Kingdom in terms of ownership of that schools education, it doesn't necessarily play out in quite the same way when you move into skills education, and particularly adult education, where the difference between, I'll pick one at random, the difference between a electrical technician standards and qualifications in England is no different to what the requirements are in Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland, or Ireland for that matter. And therefore to have an increasingly fragmented system where sometimes even the underlying curriculum might have a few subtle changes in it, doesn't really serve the labour market well and frustrates employers constantly in terms of how they engage, especially if they're a multinational employer. So one of the things that we try and do is try and achieve a better sense of harmony across the devolved nations and Westminster when it comes to skills education. So that's a lot of the policy focus. So the other one was with regard to partnerships and strategic partnerships. And partnerships is really about recognising when organisations have complementary skills to yourself. So if we're engaging in a particular activity in a sector, engineering, construction, wherever it might be, or we're engaged in particular engagement in an activity that might be on-screen assessment or digital credentials or something of that nature, we're not necessarily always going to be able to do those things on our own. So sometimes what we have to do is to seek out good, solid, strategic partners who can add to what we can say and achieve in a given topic or area. And so part of my role is I spend a lot of time travelling around the country and abroad as well, attending conferences and events, sometimes speaking, sometimes on panels, sometimes just attending, and therefore doing a lot of networking. And through conversations you get to find organisations that have similar ambitions, they have similar ideas about outcomes, and the closer that fit is, the more effective a partnership can be in achieving the outcomes. Okay. And the last area was stakeholder engagement, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And stakeholder engagement is really about understanding who the key stakeholders in a given arena are, whether that's the delivery chain, colleges, training providers, etc., whether that's the industry and employers, whether it's government departments and agencies, And you identify who are the organisations that have an influence and an impact on the outcomes, and you make sure that you maintain relationships with them. So that really is just about, I mean, in some ways it's kind of like spinning plates. You have to keep going back to those relationships and to those engagements and just make sure that it's still active. You're still having the right conversations at the right time. You're still listening to stakeholders. I think it's always been a bit of a myth. I was fascinated by one of the recent rounds of reforms. And it was IFATE that brought it in, actually, this idea that you should engage with employers to define standards, as if this was somehow a revelation. And believe me, I've worked in vocational awarding bodies for a long time, and I've never once developed a qualification or accreditation without speaking to industry and employers. So as a concept, it's a given. The only difference will be maybe how you go about doing that to ensure that you've got the right breadth of voice that feeds into occupational standards.
Okay. Paddy, I mean, you've touched on it, but I just want to, for our audience, get a sense of what is the state of play at the moment. What's the state of the nation? What are the sort of topics that are on your mind at this moment in time? You know, what are the big things, or you know, the things that you want to bring to the surface that people are talking about within our sector and in the circle that you're in.
We are. The key one for me will always be skills. Will always be skills and education. And I think if you look at the mission-led government at the moment around, and I'll pick two of the missions out: growth and opportunity. Without any doubt, for me, skills is at the heart of driving productivity and driving growth. So if you're looking to grow the economy and the prosperity of the nation, then you have to have the right skills profiles within the population and within the labour market. So it's essential for that. I think the opportunity aspect is that the opportunity should be for all. And that's, again, where I see the role of skills education particularly, is to ensure that at those transition points, 16, 18, you're not excluded from education and training and development simply because you haven't chosen the path of A-levels in university. Because actually any economy, any society doesn't exist on a proliferation of one mode rather than the other. So I think there's always going to be something about skills for me in that. I think the other thing I'd highlight probably at the moment is where we're going to get the labour from. So I don't go to any conference, whether it's health and social care, construction, engineering, whatever it might be, where one of the footnote comments is, and our industry is going to need tens of thousands extra personnel by 2030 or 2035. And when I come away from the conferences and I start to add up all of the figures, I can't help conclude that I'm not entirely sure we've got enough people in the country, let alone in the right areas where they're working. So there's something there about ensuring that if we're going to meet that growing demand, it's not going to be just about the talent pipeline coming through mainstream education. We've got to seriously look at how we adjust and adapt and upskill the existing workforce, where, you know, I think the quote is about 80% of the labour required is in the existing workforce. It's not waiting to come through. So that, again, I think is something that we have to address. And enshrined within that, which in many ways is what some of the recent labour initiatives are trying to address, is we've always tended to speak about, whenever I've spoken about employment figures and statistics, and our unemployment rate is actually relatively low at the moment, and obviously Labour's got an ambition to get to 80% employment. We're about 73 at the moment. And you tend to hear about employment figures and unemployment figures. The bit that really has come to the fore, I think, since the pandemic, has been discussion about the economically inactive, which has been the worrying trend on the increase beneath those other two figures, you know, which effectively means those of working age who choose not to work for a whole variety of reasons, and some of them might be very legitimate reasons. But if we're also facing generally a labour shortage across the UK, we cannot afford to let as many people choose or have to choose to be out of the labour market as currently happens. And I think if there was one big target that we need to address, it's how we do that. And I don't think it's just about government intervention. I think employers have got a role to step up and say, are they providing the right types of work, profiles of work, the right sort of support and assistance? to get those people back into work, because surveys suggest that there are a percentage of them who want to work. It's not because they don't want to. So we've got to find a way of resolving that.
Okay. Paddy, some aspects of your work that maybe some people may not be familiar with is work with the ex-offenders that you're doing. So some of the transition and so forth. So just bring us up to date in terms of some of those initiatives and some of the backstory behind that.
Yeah, no. So the ex-offenders work that we do, and we're particularly proud of this piece of work. And actually, recently, Intertrain won an award at the rail staff awards gala for the work that they've been doing in this space. And for me, it's a really good example of the foundation working in harmony with one of the business units in a context of where there was a really pressing need to address change. So the foundation were originally provided the C-Corn funding for the projects. Intertrain provide the varieties of training, boot camp training, etc. And the particular prison that was highlighted was High Point Prison in Suffolk. And what they've done is they've combined together to provide very sophisticated training programs aimed at usually the point at which the prisoner is nearing release. So towards the end of their sentence, near release, but providing a very concentrated skills development programme, with also the opportunity in some cases to have some early forays into apprenticeship as part of that programme, which was a change to legislation that had to go through. And then that results in a high percentage of achievement on transition. One of the biggest challenges often for ex-offenders is that transition from prison to outside life is a cliff edge. And other than a few pounds in their pocket, there is very little additional support and assistance which is given to find accommodation, to find work, etc. So by putting in place these programmes, we'd already started to introduce these prisoners to employers. They'd had some exposure to working with employers, developing the right skills to gain employment. And some of the case study stories of these individuals are life-changing. Life-changing for those individuals in terms of the support that they've had. They will never go back to offending because they suddenly realise that they've got an opportunity to do something with their lives. They can earn money, they can have a roof over their head, they can start families or revisit family connections with pride. And it's been a real jewel in the crown for us.
Okay, so you mentioned High Point Prison, but how has he come about? What's the sort of outcomes that you're looking for? Is it courses? Is it training? Is it signposting? What does he entail?
Yeah, what's the detail of it? So I think, so how did it actually come? Well, I guess how it came about initially was that we just, through some of the Ministry of Justice contracts that we've got, sometimes what you get to doing is having different conversations with the governors in prisons and understanding what their ambition is to make a difference. And with High Point, I think there was very clearly an opportunity to develop their in-house training programmes, but very specifically aimed at occupational destinations which were likely to be suitable for the people moving out of prison. So that's where Intertrain came in, and Alex Pond, who's the MD, who's a massive advocate of the programme. And what they recognised was that if they actually put in place real plant equipment, tracks, plant machinery, etc., all of the things that they would have to use when they moved out into the workplace, and also coupled that with some out-of-prison workplace experience as well. You therefore had an investment in equipment, which is something that the prison alone might not have been able to do. You had an alignment with a labour market need, which Alex and the team in Intertrain were able to identify. And you had some willing, skilled people who had a real desire to land in employment. And across all of those factors, you then have now what is now a very successful programme, where the training is focused on rail maintenance, qualifications, and exactly the same sort of equipment, in some cases better equipment now, than many other organisations would have access to and be able to use. And the transition into employment, where I guess it's an example of a sector which isn't necessarily front of mind for all people, but for these ex-offenders, it gives them a secure job, decent pay, fairly sort of regimented hours and contracts, which is what they need, and they're able to. It's a start for them in terms of a profession.
Okay. Paddy, you touched on the fact that you've been in the sector now for a couple of decades, and but your previous background is art and design and that area. So talk to us a little bit about some of the early days. I mean, a lot of our audience works with early careers, or the young people or individuals that are in their sort of career path. So how have you get here? Yeah. How do you get here?
How do you get it? And it's, let's be honest, it's a fairly circuitous route, isn't it?
Yeah.
To go from art and design to director of policy and stakeholder partnerships. Even if a career service would be able to define what stakeholder partnerships was, I very much doubt it. So I think for me it's an example of where we all begin our careers in a certain way. I think what is true, and it's very true of the period that many of our children will move into, the idea of a very linear education and then a linear career are gone. You know, the idea that you just do training and education until you're 24 or 18, and then you're in a job for life and that's you. That just doesn't exist anymore. I think it's very rare that you would ever come across that situation anymore. Now, what I would say is that, so when I was going through school, information, advice and guidance was pretty much in its infancy, and the most sophisticated it would get would be a computer in the computer lab on a Friday afternoon that you could go and tap in your interests to, and it would throw you back a job title, as if say, okay, that's what you're going to. And sure enough, if you say that you're interested in art and design, you're going to get graphic designer every time you type that into the computer, because that was kind of like the breadth of its knowledge in terms of what it would bounce back to you. And I did. I went through conventional training and disciplines through art college, and was a graphic designer for the first 7 years of my career. Now, what I would say is, and I'll explain a little bit more about the circuitous route into what I'm doing now, but before that, what I would say is that one of the things which is taking up a lot of our time at the moment is this idea of employability skills, durable skills, has been referred to as soft skills, but this range of skills which effectively I think make people resilient in the sense of they allow transition between different occupations and professions. Now, when I was going through art and design, I still maintain to this day that there were a few disciplines that I was taught that have stood me in good stead in working life, in whatever job I went into. The first was that we used to go through something called a critique every month, and the purpose of the critique was that you produced a piece of artwork against a brief, and then at the end of the month you had to stand up and explain it to your peers, your thinking behind the ideas, the concept, what you produced, and you laid yourself open to critique but not criticism. And there's an important difference. The critique, the basic rules of the game are you can challenge somebody on what they produced, but only if you can present a better idea.
Right.
So you only can challenge somebody on what they've decided to do if you might have done it a different way and you think it might have improved the outcome in some way. So what it did for on both sides was it made me more accepting of critique, because I had to do it every month, you lay yourself open to it. And it also allowed me, when I was criticising something, to always put forward a better solution.
Yeah.
To explain, actually, there might be a better way to do that. And so I think things like that play through that in later working life. And I think that's something to remember about those kind of skills and disciplines that you pick up as you're going through working life. In terms of where I moved on to, I think art and design taught me to look at things in a different way. Fresh perspectives. Because I was involved in an industry that were very early adopters of technology, I was working with Apple computers and the internet, way back in the 90s in terms of when we were doing those things, and went to work for an Apple computer reseller for a while, and then actually went to work for RSA Exams at this time that they were looking to diversify away from secretarial exams, and I developed their computer literacy and information technology course, the CLATE course, which was basic IT skills, which was in high demand then, still is in high demand now.
Wow. So
and got into exam boards through that route.
So, there's been a massive change in awarding organisations and sort of many organisations have been sort of either been bought out or they've not survived in some aspects of it, and it takes a certain sort of breed of an organisation to really stay relevant and stay current and so forth. And you touched on innovation being one of your key things. So talk to us a little bit about organisations, and particularly awarding bodies and awarding organisations have got a big role in the skills agenda and society as a whole, in terms of how they've had to sort of evolve and develop and stay current and relevant, and what your thoughts are in terms of the current landscape again.
So I think the reality is, if you're wanting to survive change, and I think what I would, I guess, reference in all of the time that I've been with awarding bodies, and actually City and Guilds produced a piece of research called Sense and Instability, where they called out just the sheer amount of churn that there has been in vocational education, policies, ministers, initiatives, etc. So you have to be fairly resilient to weather that kind of storm of change. And I think City and Guilds has been able to do it for a variety of reasons. The first is that we are a very well respected and trusted brand, and that gives us a stability, I guess, through all of that change. Having said that, various initiatives have chosen to try and erode the profile of brands, and we've been able to weather that particular storm and do that. I also think that we've never been complacent about what we do, so we've always been attempting to keep up pace with industry and employer needs with regards to skills and development and progression, and that's allowed us to then sort of keep pace with change as that has happened. So they're the kind of things that I think we have been good at, and with innovation, City and Guilds were the pioneers at, and this was before my time, they were the first to introduce online testing, they were the first to introduce electronic portfolios to support the collection of evidence. Now, both of those things actually predated the pandemic, and as soon as the pandemic hit, everybody was jumping across to doing things that way because they suddenly had to. And City and Guilds have been doing it for some time. The latest area I think we're really keen to continue to explore is around digital credentials and this development of a kind of a more stackable model of achievements and competencies that allowed you to actually mix and match different programs, different sizes of modules, which we think will play out really well in development of a lifelong learning culture, where actually the big 2-year programs aren't suitable for people who are needing to dip in and out of education and training. So that's the area that we're very keen to explore at the moment, and then how that data might then inform next stage learning or job opportunities, signpost them to employers. Just making better use of the data within those systems I think is our next big sort of frontier.
Okay, so Paddy, you're a pioneer in many aspects of it, being at the forefront of sort of digital skills, so computer literacy and information technology, the CLADE course. A lot of people have heard of that. Most people have probably been in a position where their organisation, if you're a training provider, was delivering that. If you're a college, you were delivering that. It was the forefront of computer programs, computer courses and so forth. We're now sort of talking about digital divide, digital skills predominantly at the moment. There's a gap. You've got your digital natives, and you've got people who are who probably haven't got those skill sets, and they're having to learn and so forth. So and everything is going online. If you talk about government portals and so forth, you can't now be in a position where you're not digitally sort of aware or savvy. Otherwise you're being completely left behind. So just talk to us a little bit about some of those sort of topics really. And
what we'd look to do there. I think it's I think a great shame at the moment is that digital, certainly when we were doing CLADE, digital had its place, and I think it was very much a kind of a recognition that the desktop computer had arrived, and therefore we suddenly had to wholesale change the kind of skill sets that we had in the workforce. Rightly or wrongly, that seems to have fallen away a bit, because I think government falls into the trap of assuming that Gen Z, whatever, are digital natives and are born conversant with technology and computers, which isn't the case. I think they're born with less of an anxiety about how they explore technology. They don't necessarily explore it or exploit it in the right way.
Yeah.
But I think they have that confidence with technology. However, we've been doing a lot of work recently with Future.now, who've defined a 20-point framework. And they cite the amount of people in the existing workforce that do not have sufficient digital skills. And they also cite those who are out of the workforce that don't have sufficient digital skills. And digital skills are going to be the key enabler that is going to get people back into work. Or, if you're looking at things like productivity challenges, one of the common failures, because a lot of people, a lot of organisations, when they look at productivity improvements, will invest in technology to do it. And yet what they forget is if they don't have staff who are comfortable and conversant with technology, it's going to fail. So they invest in things that don't realise the expectations they expect because they haven't invested in the people to allow them to use those things. And so for us, digital skills needs to come back to the fore. We're doing that at the moment with Future.now and the 20-point framework, which we're looking to introduce in the new year, as a kind of a benchmark that says all organisations should understand what their profile is against this framework. And all individuals seeking employment should look at this framework and at least look at which are the skills within the 20 points that have the highest utility in the labour market and look to develop those skills.
Okay. Paddy, you talked about sort of learning on demand, short, sharp courses, online learning at 11 o'clock, applying at 12 o'clock type of thing. You know, you've got a brand out there who is pioneering Kineo in terms of online learning. So just a general advice to people out there in terms of being adaptable and learning. What sort of what's your thoughts in terms of that space in terms of
in terms of being able to create that space. Look, I think for me, I think it's a truism that unfortunately there's a large percentage of our population who, for various reasons, didn't fare too well through mainstream school education.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is, and a lot of people don't realise this, mainstream school education is designed to rank order a population. That's what the assessment instruments do.
Yeah.
Now, that's because they're looking to stream people to say who are the most academically gifted that then would be best placed to move on into higher education. What it forgets to look at is, well, okay, what's that doing to the people who are in the bottom quartile of those rank orders? What it's most likely doing to them is instilling a belief that education is not for them. And there's nothing going to be more damaging to our country and our future prosperity than a percentage of people who don't see a value in investing in learning and education. Because wherever you do it, you are likely to see a benefit. And we need to instill, therefore, ways of encouraging people to spend their free time in education and learning activities. But we'll only do that if we can have quite a hard link into benefits for them to enable them to do that. The one thing I would say, though, is it's easier said than done in some ways. If I think back to my parents and my grandparents, the concept of evening class was a fairly common thing. And it was a fairly common thing because in most cases, people had 9-to-5 jobs. They finished at a certain time. The educational institutions were still open in the evening. And even if they wanted to do things at a weekend, they weren't working at a weekend. We've now got a society where a number of people are trying to hold down more than one job because they need to. Many people don't have a 9-to-5 job anymore, and many of the educational institutions aren't open in the evening to even accommodate them. So in many ways, the only way that you're going to redress that is to move towards a much more online environment and system where people can engage with learning and education as and when they choose, because it's designed in that way and it's not designed around cohorts of people in the classroom. You might get a virtual cohort at various times, but I think that's the direction that we need to head in, where it becomes more accessible, more online. The downside is, do you lose something about the face-to-face interaction with fellow learners? Probably you do. Whether or not you can encourage that through virtual forums as well, probably you can. But that for me is the reason why we need to absolutely reinvigorate a desire for learning in our culture. Otherwise, an awful lot of people are going to get left behind.
Okay. What have been the topics of conversation around AI, artificial intelligence, in your organisation and in your sort of network and forum and the conferences that you're often an attendee at and speaking at?
Yeah, so I mean, so AI is the. I'm bearing in mind that City and Guilds has lived through various various sort of revolutions, if you like. I think we were born out of the second industrial revolution and have lived through various iterations of those revolutions since then. I think the big difference for AI, and we would come at AI from probably about 4 different perspectives. The big difference for me with AI is that whereas previous revolutions have largely displaced manual labour, I think AI starts to encroach on cerebral activities, decision making, thinking, creation, which is new territory. I think in previously in society, people have looked on as blue collar jobs have been displaced by interventions in technology. People are feeling a little bit more anxious about white collar jobs getting displaced by technology. But our view is several. There's part of our organisation where there are concerns about AI in the hands of learners, but to be honest, we don't make use of many extended response question types with our assessment. Okay. So we're less susceptible to an individual using AI to produce a response, if that makes sense. Okay. Most of our assessment is invigilated, etc. Most of it is focused on skills, not knowledge understanding. We are making use of AI in production terms and in efficiency terms, and are just exploring its use there to see how efficient it could make different systems. There are a number of people in our organisation that already make use of AI for producing their reports and things of that nature, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. From the other side of it then is how we monitor the impact of AI on other professions and occupations, which is what we do day in, day out. And that's the bit that becomes a bit harder to track. So to what extent does AI and other technologies start to infiltrate the way in which other occupations and professions work? And therefore, do we have to be mindful of that within our curriculum design and within our assessment design? And one of the things that's come to the fore more recently is what's been termed prompt engineering. So the skill of being able to ask the AI systems the right questions to get the desired outcome from them, which is a skill of itself, often underpinned by having quite a strong grasp on the facts in the theory, because you need to be able to judge whether what you get back is correct or not. I think last time I was on platform, I was fascinated when you think about AI, that if it had been introduced at the time of, say, Columbus or Copernicus, if they'd have typed into it, is the Earth flat? It probably would have come back and said, yes, the Earth's flat. Yes. Because it's a collection of perceived wisdom at a moment in time. Okay. So one of my worries with AI is that we stifle the human ability for creativity and for thinking beyond perceived wisdom. Okay. It'll always be really good at efficiency, really good at that, because that's what it does well. Okay.
That's some great insights there. Paddy, apart from the role at Sitting Gills, which is a huge responsibility, you're involved with other initiatives as well, BITC, Business in the Community, and you're involved with other, you're quite active in terms of other roles and responsibilities. So talk to us a little bit about some of those other hats that you potentially wear.
Yeah, the kind of extracurricular activities. So look, I mean, I was involved for a long time in junior sport. My 2 sons went through junior sport in Coventry, and I was the chair of the football club, and always been a long time advocate of sport and recreation as being things that young people should do, for a whole variety of reasons. I think it instills and develops teamwork, respect, discipline into young people, and that's a good thing. Plus also the health benefits of sport activity anyway. But also with things like business in the community, what I wanted to do was really get much closer to the impact that education and skills interventions can have. We're a big supporter of 2 things with business in the community. One of them is the Seeing is Believing programme, where we go out into localities. I was out in Coventry the other week, and me and a collection of other business people taken around some of the sites in Coventry that were effectively sort of shelter sites, food banks, coupled with some training and development, etc. Just really being exposed to the reality of lives for some people. And it's very easy to get distance from that. It's very easy, I think, as you develop in your own career and perhaps you get a bit more prosperous or whatever, to actually forget that not everybody's in that situation and not everybody has the choices that we have. And very humbling, I think, to go out and see those things. So again, for me, it's a way of staying connected and staying grounded with the kind of work that we do. The other one that we do with them is the job coaching program, where we work with industry to identify people who want to be mentors to young people in schools who don't have the parent or guardian scaffold around them. So they don't have ready-made support or advice. So the industry mentors are matched with these young people, who then go through a period of weekly, monthly interactions and calls where they just listen. They just listen to them and talk to them about ambition, choices, things that they could be if they wanted to be, and give them advice. Because these young people literally don't have anywhere else to turn for that sort of advice. And again, it's something that you take for granted when you exist in quite a strong family, parental, guardian network that offers you that sort of advice and support.
Okay, Paddy, I just want to get your thoughts on leadership. I mean, you've got a massive commitment to leadership. You're a fellow of the Institute of Employability Professionals. You've got a role within the Windsor St George's House leadership sort of fellowship there. Lifelong learning is obviously what we're all about to a certain level, and you lead on that. So talk to us a little bit about your you as a leader, as an individual. How you've sort of changed and developed, how you sort of work with others, and how you talk about leadership and perceive leadership.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if I'm honest, it's probably one of the hardest things for me to do, to talk about myself in terms of qualities that I've got or a journey that I've been on in terms of development, etc.
Yeah.
And what I would say is, I think the reality is that for most leaders, they've probably been through that management transition of the accidental manager. Through years of service or promotion, you find yourself in a position where you are line managing people and having to therefore support them in a variety of ways in development. And I think as that's progressed, I'd like to think that in terms of leadership style, it's inclusive, it's engaged. I get an awful lot of pleasure these days, actually, from seeing people that I have managed develop in their own right and develop beyond me, beyond the organisation. Sometimes it's fine to leave the organisation and develop themselves in a way that they want to develop, and really just be there as a kind of reflective leader. We had a session the other day. We had our directorate day where we were doing some sort of shared profiles, and we had to bring in an object that we thought best described our traits and behaviours. And I brought in a compass, because what I was saying is that probably the thing that I'd like to hope that I do is that I provide sort of direction, and there's a North Star. That's what we set sail for.
Yeah.
Try and ensure that people understand the direction that we're going in, try and ensure that everybody comes with us, we make that journey. But I'm largely there to just try and ensure that we plot a safe course.
Absolutely. Paddy, you touched on the fact that if you spoke to a careers advice, and particularly in your younger days when you were doing your art and design, they wouldn't have mapped you getting to the position and the impact that you're currently making. So what advice would you give to a younger person in their sort of early years, in terms of any aspiring professionals out there, either in our sector or just in the world of work? How any sort of nuggets of wisdom gold.
I was looking back and giving advice, which I do. I mean, I'm in a privileged position of having two boys that I've had to give advice to over the years, and thankfully things haven't turned out too badly for them. I think what I would say for both of them is that I was aware enough of education and training not to be, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with wanting your children to go to university, there isn't at all, but I was able to give a slightly more broader advice about their next steps and what they could pursue, and the fact that it would still work out well for them, and indeed it has for both of them. In terms of my advice, I guess my advice was, if you're able to, make your really career as linked to something that you're passionate about as you can. Because the other bits of your career you will pick up as you go along. But if you're not passionate or engaged in some way, with the work that you do, it will soon become a real chore to have to turn up for work every day. If you can find a link with a passion, that stands you in good stead. And for me, yes, fair enough, at first it was art and design and things like that. If I'm honest, on reflection now, I think my passion was probably always about helping people to better themselves.
Okay, fantastic. So trying to bring the conversation to a close, we've had a lovely conversation spanning a number of topics and so forth, but I want to talk a little bit about potentially getting you to talk about next steps for your good self, the organisation as well. You know, you've been 12 years, it's gone very, very quick, as we've discussed, 6 years in this current role, and, you know, there's been massive change within the further education sector, the skills sector, the awarding organisation sector, and just generally in terms of the economy as a whole. So, you know, how do you see sort of the opportunities and challenges ahead for the group, City and Girls Group, the world of work? It's a big question, and also for yourself in terms of just concluding remarks and thoughts, Paddy.
So, I mean, I think for City and Guilds, the biggest challenge for City and Guilds is, you know, having been around for 140 years, to stay relevant for another 140 years. Yeah. And I think they're well placed to do that in terms of their agility and their areas of focus. I think very much the idea that employees in the industry need to be supported to go through their own transitions will be a key area of focus, and something that we'll continue to focus on. I think the challenge of how we ensure that we make the best use of labour market as we can will remain a challenge for us over this next couple of terms of office of government, and I think will enthuse us as well to do that, and that we do turn the corner on a recession and get the economy back on the uptick. I think that for me will be a huge measure of success if we can be part of that process. In terms of for me and what, you know, I remain infused every day that I come into work. I'm very privileged to have some good people around me, very privileged to have a great leader, and mentoring our senior executive staff, which always helps. What that means in terms of all of the things that I do next, I don't know. I think I'm finding quite a lot of fulfilment at the moment about looking at various other organisations that I can support as well, alongside the mainstream work that I do. The one thing I would say is that, you know, I thrive on variety. So I think as long as I can find enough things to keep me interested and occupied, then that'll keep me going for a little while, yeah.
Absolutely. Paddy, you've been a very influential figure in our life, particularly the work that we're doing with the Multicultural Apprenticeship and Skills Alliance. You've been a promoter of our work. You're a fantastic ally and a supporter of everything that we do in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion as well. And thank you so much for that support. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I know it's taken us quite a while to get you here. But we've had a delightful conversation, a lot of wisdom there, a lot of insights there. And thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey, your valuable insights today with us. Thank you so much. Any final words of any wisdom or any appreciation would be appreciated.
It's always really difficult to end on a soundbite. Look, I mean, I don't know why it's taken us so long. I mean, it's been a real pleasure. It always has been a pleasure engaging with folks like yourself who are so committed to doing the right thing for the right people. I think, you know, if we can look back and say that we made a difference to the majority of people's lives through intervention, and got them into the right jobs at the right time, then that will be, that's all I want as a legacy, really.
Thank you, Paddy. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.